Um, we got a theme for today, which is signal versus noise. Which is more powerful? And that's our overarching question to explore here. I think we've spent years here assuming that the ABT is an element of signal that is really powerful, but more and more I'm getting kind of interested in noise. And the last time we met was 2 weeks ago. Decided to take a break last week. We're so swamped this month with all the stuff we got going. But really, in the last 2 months, we've kind of had this realization that the ABT is all about signal to noise, with the and being noise, and really what you're doing, the ABT is using as a tool to try and improve the signal of what you're communicating. So here's today's theme, or today's topic, Zeit Trash, which I'll explain in about 10 minutes. AI slop is just a part of it. Today's all about noise, and our spotlight guest, who's our guest that just comes on at the beginning, and I'll ask 3 or 4 questions to get the ball rolling. Then it's kind of open season for everybody. My longtime buddy and guru advisor for my Hollywood adventures, Mike Backus, and I will talk a little bit about him in a minute when I bring him on. So here we go with some little setup here about this theme of noise, and 3 things I want to run through very quickly, just to kind of plant some seeds for people to ask questions and talk about noise reduction, noise as a weapon, and overcoming noise. So first off, noise reduction. And, we've developed this new training form for the ABT training, which is our mini course. We just got through running, I think, the 10th round of it, maybe 11th. And it now does the whole thing in 1 week, Monday to Friday. And the key element that happens in the mini course is iteration. We work with everybody on their first draft of their ABT on Monday and go through 5 drafts. And then on Friday, we pull everybody together. It's usually about 10 to 12 participants. And we read their beginning and final, their 5th draft, and they get to see what the ABT has done for them in tightening up their narrative. So last week we ran it with a group from the Gates Foundation, their Alzheimer's research, or part of their Alzheimer's research group. And one of the ABTs on Friday, I just could not get over. And so we asked the fellow if it was okay to share this with everybody. And I think he enjoyed the journey that he went through. So this is just a little demonstration of how the ABT works. What I'm going to share with you here is the alpha and omega drafts, the first draft that we had on Monday, and then where it got to thanks to the ABT and 5 revisions. And it's basically editing, but the ABT is a more analytical version of that. So bear with me here as I quickly run through these 2 ABTs. Here's what he started with on Monday. Accurate subtyping of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias is essential to identify targeted biomarkers and enable personalized therapies. And high resolution arterial spin labeling, ASL, combined with diffusion-derived indices, can uniquely reveal neurovascular and clearance-related axes of heterogeneity. But these axes are undersampled in current studies, and existing pipelines are hampered by low resolution ASL, poor SNR, and feature-length errors that undermine reproducibility. Therefore, we will assemble a rigorously phenotyped ASL-centered multimodal cohort, develop a reference-free, locally adaptive ASL enhancement, and implement a sparsity-promoting, outlier-tolerant trifactorization co-clustering framework to discover robust, biologically interpretable ADRD subtypes. There you go. Very simple little ABT. Now, given 5 drafts and us going at it, and the scientist himself doing these revisions, we just give him the notes, but here's where he got it to by Friday. Subtyping, which is the process of identifying distinct biological or clinical subgroups under the same diagnosis, is an important tool for fighting disease. And in the case of Alzheimer's, if we can achieve reliable subtyping, then we can deliver personalized treatment, leading to improved patient outcomes and more effective use of therapies. But here's the problem. At present, we cannot, because current studies lack high-quality neurovascular measures for subtyping. Therefore, we're developing ASL enhancement techniques to obtain reliable neurovascular features. This was weeding out so much noise out of that first draft, working with him over and over again, trying to get to the singular narrative, saying, what is the one thing you're really trying to get at here, and trying to refine it. And that's what I think is so important, is combating noise. So here's the second little thing I have to share is noise as a weapon. And, last spring we spent quite a few of these sessions talking about noise and different things that I'll mention. And this fellow, who really is kind of the grand master of understanding noise, I think more than almost anybody else these days in the practical sense of our society, Steve Bannon in 2018 was quoted by Michael Lewis saying, Democrats don't matter. The real opposition is the media, and the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit. He mentioned it back then, 2018. it kind of sat there dormant until January, February this year, when all of a sudden they unleashed it as a strategy with the second Trump term. And suddenly all the Democrats were stumbling around saying, "What is this? How can they do this?" It was flood the zone, and it was very, very effective. This is a really powerful interview that David Brooks in the New York Times did with Bannon a year ago that I keep quoting from and keep studying. And it really, this is what led to this breakthrough of realizing noise, signal and noise. In there, Bannon talking about Trump. He said Trump understands that to get anything done, you have to make the people understand. So therefore, constantly we're in a battle of narrative, unrestricted narrative warfare. Everything is narrative. In that regard, you have to make sure you forget about the noise and focus on the signal. It was that line there about 2 months ago as I was getting ready for the talk that I gave at Emory that suddenly hit me. Wait a second, that's ABT versus and, noise and signal. That's the language we need to be talking about. All right, now I want to share a little personal anecdote because I turned 72 weeks ago. So I'm at the grumpy old age where I get to tell tales from my younger years. And this is completely relevant. I wonder if Bannon even knows about this or has thought about it. In the spring of 1982, my girlfriend at the time was an undergraduate at UC Santa Cruz, and I was out there visiting. And by coincidence, that week they had a whole big special week of George McGovern visiting the campus, giving a whole bunch of talks and things, had a whole schedule for him. He had run for president in 1972. And on one of the mornings, there was on the schedule that he was going to be at this coffee shop on campus. So I went there. It was like 6:30 in the morning, hoping that I could make my way through the crowd and maybe even meet him. I walk in the coffee shop and there he is at a table with two undergraduates, and that's it. That's the only people that got up that morning. I went over and sat down, and being a graduate student, I kind of pulled rank, and it turned into a half an hour one-on-one conversation I had with good old George, who was just the nicest, most humble guy. And he started digging in deep, telling me the stories of all of his bitterness about what happened in 72, which was he became the victim of all the dirty tricks of Nixon's crew. And at the core of it all, what he talked about, the term he used was rat fucking, and that was the term that emerged back then. And what it was mostly was a bunch of undergraduates at USC who had been frat boys who had developed this term and this whole pranking thing that they would do as undergraduates that was all good natured. And Wikipedia has a page on rat fucking. When you read it there, it mostly talks about it as pranking, sort of good natured. But they took that technique and they eventually ended up with Haldeman and all those guys being all of Nixon's crew. And then they turned it into really nasty, dirty tricks, of which it was first focused on Edmund Muskie and got him out of the primaries, just completely torpedoed him. And then eventually they focused it on McGovern. And that was, he was telling me these stories about, all these different schedules they would manage to change on them. And people would show up at fake events and whatever. And just so much noise that they threw into the system. And at the center of it all was this character, Donald Segretti. And he was the main guy that really was the main manipulator driving all of that. And so when you go looking for a real explanation of this, you don't really find it on the rat fucking page, but on his Wikipedia page, here's what it says. Many historians have indicated over the years that Muskie's subsequent withdrawal from the presidential primaries was at least partly the result of Segretti and some of the other rat fuckers having created so much confusion and so many false accusations that Muskie simply could not respond in any meaningful way. There is your use of noise as a weapon. Same sort of thing as Bannon. And then some of you who were here may remember in the spring, I had Jeannie Scott from the World of Evolution came and talked about the Gish Gallop. That was a term that she coined. And this is last year, Mehdi Hassan's book about debating. And he's an MSNBC correspondent. And he had a whole chapter on the Gish Gallop. And he very astutely pulled together the Gish Gallop with Flood the Zone with shit before Bannon even unleashed it. And really, what the Gish Gallop was about is this creationist, Duane Gish, who developed this technique of debating scientists where he would just spew one fact after another, all wrong, all misinformation, and gallop so fast that the poor scientists couldn't keep up with him. I'm trying to explain to you the first fact, and you're on the eighth fact now. Again, flood the zone with shit, noise, noise, noise as a weapon.
I'm sorry, Brandy, can I interject? They weren't facts, they were statements. Flooding false statements.
Yeah, okay, yeah, right, exactly. Flood the zone with statements. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, and in his opinion, they were facts, but you're right, they were statements, and they were misinformation, precisely. Okay, doke. So, and now third topic here is overcoming noise. And This is where it comes back to what we live and breathe by here in ABT land, which is the power and importance of the singular narrative, trying to get things down to one thing in a world of too much information. And in a world of not much information, sure, you can have fun with eight different points, but when everything gets so noisy, this is your only hope of breaking through is to get really, really focused. And guess who understands this at a deep and visceral level from the very beginning? He came out of the gates not with some committee advising him, not with a bunch of focus groups, not with any sort of communications firm guiding him. He had a singular gut instinct of this slogan, which granted Reagan and others have used it in the past. There's a long history of this as a basic theme working, but he knew instinctively to pick up on it and make it his centerpiece more than anybody ever. And here we are 10 years later, after the Democrats spent years trying to ridicule it. They just have been crushed by it now. And the bane of the Democrats, there's the old saying from Will Rogers, I wouldn't be a member of any organized party. I'm a Democrat. So it's not just recent years that they are so unfocused. It goes back decades and decades, but they do have this huge problem with focus and they pride themselves on all their diversity. But in a world of too much information, it's really kind of maladaptive to have so many different voices at once. And you see it in their rallies when they're protesting things. You just don't see any recurring message. You see they pride themselves on all the different signs and things like that. However, there may be an exception emerging to this. And the more I hear of this, the more of a fan I'm becoming. And this is very relevant because it's coming this weekend. But in the spring, in June, they staged first big set of demonstrations with this singular theme to some extent. Still, you see all the diversity of signs and things like that that they're so proud of. But there was increasingly unity around a single message here of no kings. And now this guy is the originator of it, Ezra Levin, along with his wife, Leah Greenberg, and their organization Indivisible, and they seem to be getting really major traction at this point, I think. So he was on Rachel Maddow 2 nights ago. He's the lead.
We lost Randy. Am I
We
right?
lost Randy. Okay, it's not just me. Cool. I will give the man a call. Stand by, everybody.
I hope he can answer because he looks frozen. So
Oh no, he's having a seizure.
Lead spokes.
Hey, thanks for considering membership.
Randy, your mic is off.
There it is.
There we go.
Okay, sorry about that. Welcome to my neighborhood where the signal goes in and out at times. But yeah, if I can go back to,
Ah, Malibu.
yes, exactly. Back to sharing. So there's where we were, and I think that's pretty much where I was this. Uh,
Yep.
okay, great. And so this Saturday, coming to a town near you, they've got like over 2,000 of these demonstrations happening now, so they should make major news. They had 5 million people turn out in June. This one will be bigger. And the bottom line is that there's a possibility that this could be cutting through the noise. And actually, the question is, can they continue to get unity? What they ought to be having is just thousands of these no king signs everywhere. It's about this singular narrative as opposed to all of their diversity they're so proud of. So, anyhow, on that note, on Saturday, I was having a chat with my good buddy Mike, who's here with us. And Mike and he's been guiding me for over 30 years, my whole journey through Hollywood. He's got a fascinating career that's kind of gone through different epics, you could say. In the 90s, he was a screenwriter. In 2000s, he was one of the world's top experts on medical marijuana. And these days, he's involved in AI work. And in the middle of this discussion where I was talking about noise, he just popped off with this term "zeit trash," and I said, "Did you get that from somewhere? Did you just make that up right now?" And I searched it and I didn't find it anywhere, and I love it. It's just basically zeitgeist combined with trash, which AI slop and everything is central to it all. So on that note, I will stop sharing and we will now dive in and have some fun. And Mike, first off, give us the origin of Zeit Trash.
Um, there's actually a term for it when put peanut butter and chocolate together. And it's just the idea of that we live in a world. I mean, this is the process that we've reached where starting with the birth of information theory and Claude Shannon back in the day, where he was just trying to get rid of distortion in electronic communication. If you've heard any of those early moon, conversations with astronauts on the moon, understanding them is incredibly difficult because they're having such a distortion problem in the weak signals that are being sent from moon to Earth. And so Shannon was trying to engineer how to order bits of data to extract signal from a noisy background. And then you have Marshall McLuhan comes along and says, wait. These new mediums, these new electronic mediums, their side effect becomes where the noise has some of the message because of the nature of the communication. And then you get guys like Randy Olson who come along and they say, well, wait a second, you can extract narrative, you can amplify narrative by getting a clear causal story with ABT. And then Crichton, who influenced both Randy and I, he was really obsessed with this idea of institutional opacity, where you used noise as a weapon to confuse the great unwashed. And he was really obsessed with it. And it was the reason he wrote the way he wrote. The reason he wrote the way he wrote was he liked to take complex ideas and try to make them understandable by wading through the jargon and pulling out the gems and presenting them to people. And then there's another guy named Paul Virilio, who was a critical theorist. And what he said was that a lot of this noise is the residue of the speed at which we are presented with information. So he said that what happened is that these new media came online, they became faster and faster and faster, and the effect of that speed becomes things are difficult to understand because there's just so much stuff coming at you at once and you can't process it. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask a couple questions on that to get started, and then everybody will start jumping in with questions. But one of the suggestions I've offered up is the thing that actually Bannon, Trump, and Michael Crichton have in common is they all spent major time in media production, not just studying it, not just being interviewed, not just reading articles and books and things like that. They actually were involved in the production side of it. Bannon produced 18 Hollywood movies before he really dove deep, and he also was the director of Biosphere 2 of all the crazy things. And Trump, of course, was the epicenter of his show The Apprentice and lots of other media stuff over the ages. With the net result of them, all three of them being bilingual and having a deep understanding of both society and media. Deeper than most journalists and people like that and news pundits, especially political news pundits who think they understand how this society works. Those guys got at a deep level, and I think it's reflected in that interview last year with Bannon, where he said in another quote that he said Trump is a McLuhan-esque character, and he views it from that perspective of McLuhan. What do you think Michael Crichton would have to say today about Bannon? Would he call Bannon a hack? Would he call?
Absolutely not. He knew him.
Oh, fill us in on that.
Well, just he run into him around town for sure. And I didn't talk to him much about Bannon, but I heard him mention him several times.
Where would Bannon have been in 2005 or so when Crichton was testifying to Congress on climate stuff?
No idea.
Yeah, because I mean, he had drifted into sort of the right wing at that point. and the Heartland Institute and things of that sort. Um,
Where Crichton and Bannon share a thread is Crichton's contention, as Bannon's is that manufacturing entropy makes you appear indispensable.
tell us more on that. What do you
Well, in
mean?
other words, strategic obfuscation.
Yeah.
Where if you crowd the space with noise and shit, as Bannon calls it,
Yeah.
You appear to be the indispensable person who knows what the hell is going on. And so what it is you get these. We live in a world of pundits where we have so much noise that these random insights into the noise, those people become experts. Weaponizing confusion can masquerade as expertise every single time.
Do you think it's more prevalent today with the amount of information that we've got and the speed of everything going than in the
Yeah,
past?
that's what Virilio says. To some degree, that's what McLuhan says. You have these people have these insights in the fact that if you look at how fast mediums have become since the mid 19th century, it's shocking.
Yeah. Well,
to move from telegraph to telephone to
and it's interesting that you're talking about two variables there because it's both sheer volume of information combined with speed that produces the whole blur that eventually results in the shift from substance to style. And that's where it strikes me that so many of the politicians and journalists of today are and the science people in particular are still communicating like it was the 1990s. And I don't see a focus or a curiosity from them on that. I don't see them
it
trying.
evolves. It evolves. I mean, the thing is that
Yeah.
you don't react to these shifts in velocity and volume instantly. You have to kind of learn them. And the people who learn them first have a tendency to control.
Yeah. And so why didn't anybody see Flood the Zone coming? Number one. Number two, why haven't all the opponents banded together to study it and try and study
Wait a
Bannon?
second. Hold on.
Yeah.
I think it's a bridge too far. And the reason is that if you want to see where this started, go to a university. Okay. Because really, I mean, the truth is a lot of universities, even though some of the clearest and best teachers are revered at these institutions, these are towers of obfuscation. I mean, it's a priest class, and they're trying to keep you out.
And I think sadly it was on massive display with the three university presidents that tried to testify to Congress and got hauled out and shown for was that not just a public demonstration of exactly what you're saying, which is sad. And then and so everybody knows, part of the reason I have so much interest and respect for Mike on this topic is that one of the many things that he's kind of guided me on was about 8 or 9 years ago, pointed me to that Michael Crichton, a short note, 3-page note in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1975 titled Medical Obfuscation. And that is one of the centerpieces of the talks that I give now. And 3 weeks ago at Emory University, that was one of the main, I kind of used it in a plant and payoff technique. I introduced it at the beginning. This short paper was published that was titled Medical Obfuscation, warning in 1975 of what you've just talked about, that this academic world had developed a mode of communication that is just so indecipherable and inefficient that there's going to be a cost to it eventually. And I usually plan at the start of the talk and then later pay it off by coming back and revealing who the author was. And at Emory Medical School, you could hear gasps in the audience. Oh my God. And I looked out and I could see all these people chuckling like, oh my God, that's the guy, And that was it, plain and simple. He knew it in 75 and tried to warn of it. And I think Marshall McLuhan was warning of it in the 60s. And now we're here. And the other thing is this idea of the term that McLuhan coined that hasn't gotten any traction. But if you search it, you can find, I did yesterday, there's 4 or 5 little videos and websites talking about it, but it's the information maelstrom. And that was in the final year or two of his life. He was lecturing. There's one lecture in Canada that he gave that there's some clips of it in this one video of him saying that we're headed towards this world in which the production of misinformation will exceed the production of information. And then somebody in this group sent me an article from Proceedings National Academy of Science from about 3 or 4 months ago that was the editors of a journal publishing an article saying that we can see now the majority of information coming in on these manuscripts now are misinformation or is misinformation. So at least in their tiny little portal, they're saying that we're actually at that point of the information maelstrom. And what are your thoughts on that before we open up for a question, Mike? The information maelstrom, are we there? And where
Oh,
are we
for
headed?
sure.
Where are we headed to?
For sure. And right now, more and more people are leaning into using AI as a coping mechanism where, I can't even come up with a search phrase. Let me ask the AI what this means.
Okay, Matthew, um, who's got, and Charles, you are obliged to ask a question to start with here.
Yeah, I'm going to first give a plug for George Orwell. He wrote Politics in the English Language back in, I don't know when, 1940s or 40s maybe, where he talks about the use of obfuscating language to exactly what you said, Mike, about preventing people understanding what's happening. So instead of saying, we think it's good to shoot people if you get good results, you say, well, under certain circumstances, it's necessary to unfortunately condone the certain deletions of restrictions of certain behaviors on groups that might be causing trouble in the blah, blah, blah.
And what's really sad is that it's always used in tyrannies to justify extrajudicial killing.
Yeah, murders. Right. Yeah. And that's just the point, that it's a tool to obscure, to prevent people understanding clear, simple things. So exactly what you were saying. But George Orwell, Politics in the English Language is just
there's a new documentary about Orwell.
Oh, really?
It's just showing up in theaters, I think in the next couple of weeks, called 2 + 2 = 5.
Oh, nice. Right. This is the price of it. This is worth the price of admission, right? Here, this information.
And you gotta read Chris Hitchens' book, Why Orwell Matters. It is genius. It is really, really a good book.
And well, in another dimension, this stuff also I came across was Marshall McLuhan's most important work was his book, I think in 64. I think it's called Understanding Media. Yeah. And in the preface to it, I think it's maybe the forward, somebody else wrote this and talked about how, I think it was the editor of the book said to McLuhan, I really feel sorry for you with this book because most books only present about 10% of their content is new ideas. And your book is 70% new ideas. And the public's just not going to be able to grasp it. It's just too much novelty and too much new ideas. People can only digest a small amount of novelty. And that's why, people all tend to, as a group, be conservative and try and push for non-innovation.
It does provide you with the opportunity that McLuhan enjoyed of the long tail, where something and then it echoes decades down the line.
Well, does it though? That's a really good point, because the more you read about him right now, his grandson is the director. I've mentioned this in this group before. His grandson is the director of the McLuhan Institute, and he had a big essay in 2021 that I found where he's complaining about how nobody understands. That was the scene in Annie Hall where Woody Allen's got him, pulls him into the line there, and he says verbatim there, nobody understands what I was talking. And he's known as a really bad communicator, a guy who was a good theorist and understood these things. But like so many of them, and I would argue the same thing for Joseph Campbell and a lot of other folks that could see analytically things, but they really weren't that great at kind of getting people engaged.
Well, also, I think people have to accept how difficult McLuhan's message is. If you tell somebody that the noise is the new message, you're going to make their head spin.
Well, and that's what in this article, his grandson talks about that on Wikipedia. He said year after year, they've got it wrong on the Wikipedia page. He goes, he said he's like tried 6 or 7 times. He corrects it and the editors put it back to their own perception of it. And that's how broadly misunderstood he is. The medium is the message. It's just, yeah, people don't really completely understand that. Matthew, we got some other thoughts and comments?
Yeah, Andrew Refkin, you shared some interesting things in chat. Care to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that keeps me up at night is going back to what it might have been Cheney who said this in the New York Times. If you look at that chat back in 2004, he said, we're just doing shit. You're all catching up. And think about that in the context of now, where they're extrajudicial killings, one after the other off of the coast of Venezuela. You got countless ICE things happening, but they're things. They're not language. And then they have the language on social media, and the Trump White House social media people are really good at their own meme wars. And so, what do you do when it's not language? When the flooding the zone is with actual actions? And here we are, we're all talking about them, and on the right and the left and the middle, but they're just doing stuff in ways that are just piling up. So it's
Right,
not just flooding the zone with
Yeah.
noise.
Yeah, I'd add that
No,
it's
but
like
also,
flooding with shit is different. Like Bannon's reference of flood the zone with shit to deal with the media is different from what you're saying, Andrew, which is exactly, it's like doing things that are gratuitously illegal and just one after the next several times per day. And so it's a different thing than, like, flooding the zone with shit is a different thing than what's happened in the Trump administration with all these executive orders. And that's an important distinction you're making. Yeah,
but
I
it's
think
a,
you're
it is a
but
way to
it
hide the
does then.
signal.
Well,
It's like
hang on. So let's go one at a time. Andy.
Well, it's like throwing a stone in a pond. Then it creates these reverberating, efforts to restore some kind of narrative. But as long as they're throwing these rocks in the pond, then the narrative question almost is irrelevant. It gets to, well, what actually can you do in this environment that will quiet the pond down enough so the narrative can be some kind of narrative can be restored. That I'm kind of making the point that they're creating as much noise as they can using, but they're not using words. They're just doing stuff.
And Mike, were you going to add to that?
Well, just this idea that you can use noise to hide a signal you want to either diminish or have people discount. And the Trump administration is brilliant at it. And it's banning stock and trade, which is just flood the channel. And even if you do something outrageous and illegal and egregious, you can reduce the impact of that signal in this wash of shit.
Yeah.
Matthew.
And that's where the no kings thing that Randy brought up is really interesting. It's a very, very, very clear message.
Yeah.
And one that you can just hammer on somebody. And it's difficult for them, unless they want to, their counter campaign should be, well, kings are great.
Well, actually, no, he was
There
on
is
2 nights ago. He was on Rachel Maddow, and that was exactly one of the things that he addressed, which is the nice thing about it is that it paints them in a corner where they can't really come back with that. Yeah, or they need to, and they know that won't wash with the American public, which is very, very interesting. But yeah, Matthew, another comment?
Julie, you had a question about obfuscation noise and the Gish Gallop?
Yeah, it just fascinates me how among all this noise, then people sort of refer or are drawn towards the crazy stuff, right? And almost the cruelty stuff, right? They lean towards, yes, January 6th was a hoax, or the election was stolen, or these things that to some of us just seems like crazy thinking, and it why do people, like, when their common sense is right in front of them, still say no, it happened this way, and because of the signal through the.
Well, let me take a first shot at that, which is that 10 years ago in the Houston book, Twitter was still at 140 characters. And I wrote an appendix in there about that, which is that we were running our workshops and having people write in ABTs without any coaching in advance. And as we began to count the number of characters in the average ABT that people write, it was 300 characters average. And you match that up against 140 for Twitter, what that suggests is that you can't fit a complete narrative inside of Twitter. And if you break it down to the three elements, agreement, contradiction, and consequence, which of those three do you think is going to get selected for? Are people going to compress their 300 character narrative down to 140 characters, or are they just going to chop one of those elements out and tweet that? And that is exactly what was going on, which was that it was just all contradiction with no context for setup and no consequences explaining why this is important or who knows what. And then, as I mentioned there was a big flap with Stephen Colbert that got taken out of context and put a joke that he told and then put onto Twitter and looked like it was racist if you just took the turn, the little punchline thing at it and removed the whole context. And then he had on the two co-creators of Twitter and they said, yeah, we're beginning to realize we're gonna have to do something. And then they did the next year. They doubled the number of characters to 280, which is right next to 300. But I think what that reflects is this tendency that when information becomes super abundant and saturating, there's selection towards just the contradiction element. And so we see this over and over again. There's selection against the setup. There's selection against context, selection against first act. You can see it in movies now that my documentary buddies talk about this, that all the documentaries they're doing, they want the bomb to go off in the first 2 minutes. We don't want to take 10 or 15 minutes getting set up in the world before the bomb goes off. So all of this shift. And Mike, given your background in screenwriting, what are your thoughts about the eventual extinction of the first act in storytelling?
Well, the only thing that becomes important in the future is high narrative fidelity, and informational truth becomes secondary.
Okay, excellent, Peter. Yeah,
I'm sorry. What does high narrative fidelity mean?
You've got a really solid ABT, and so this idea that you know, I have people who live in my building who are complete conspiracy hacks. And the thing that's really fascinating about them is they basically use the dark mirror of the ABT, which is this idea that there are powerful elites and secret networks. They're hiding the truth from us. Therefore, only insiders and awakened ones can see the pattern and figure out what's going on. And what they do is they adopt self-sealing logic, where every contradiction is further proof. And let me tell you, it's an extremely effective strategy to intensify noise while appearing coherent.
Well, and at the simple core of it is just that everything you know is wrong. You know, it's that headline that they agree.
Firesign Theater.
Yeah, exactly. Firesign Theater. Boy, everybody Google that if you're not old enough to know that reference point. Peter, jump in.
Yeah. Speaking of effective elites, yesterday, Matt Groening of The Simpsons, longest running TV show in, recent memory, said that they no longer do setups. They do setups that are themselves a joke. And because they have the writer's room from heaven, they have the ability to write a joke in the first draft with standard setup, punchline, setup. And but in the third draft, they're already making that setup its own punchline for its own joke. And then they do that over and over again. And you can see this in things like 30 Rock, where there'll be 3 or 4 jokes embedded in a joke, where the setup has become its own joke. And there's a great example of this, which is totally related to ABT, where the Jenna dumb character, allegedly, in 30 Rock, is set up this soft pitch in an improv style thing where she's just supposed to do yes and instead she says no. And so the setup and the joke are all done, and then she adds to it by, instead of picking up on it, saying no. Brilliant, masterful, but only available to writers' rooms of 20 graduates from Harvard who are all at the Crimson.
Yeah, but okay, interesting point on that, which is where'd the ABT come from? It came from the South Park guys, exactly. And then, they had picked it up from Frank Danielle, who in the 1986 gave a speech that I found it first mentioned there. So he was the screenwriting instructor at USC. And he had a bunch of students that radiated across the country and taught. And I think one of them was at University of Colorado that they got it from. Yeah, Peter.
So Matt Groening went to the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, which was one of the last colleges founded in that post-Sputnik redevelopment of American colleges. And it was founded as a liberal college. And when he went there, he was writing for the Cooper Point Journal, which was a parody of the Wall Street Journal. And he had a teacher there, Mark Levinsky, reputedly the hardest teacher at Evergreen, a place notorious for easy teachers. And Mark Levinsky told Matt Groening, "Oh, you appear to be able to do this thing that you like, and you appear to be able to do it well, but is it worth doing?" And so Groening devoted his life to it. Thank God, thank heaven for what he's given to our country. And coincidentally, Carrie Brownstein of Slater-Kinney also went to Evergreen, and I went there as a freshman.
Interesting. Well, and so getting back to looking at what we're talking about here is between The Simpsons and South Park, those are a bunch of really brilliant narrative minds that are, I would argue, just about the cutting edge of narrative structure in our society. And then you go to the political world that doesn't have any of that insight and doesn't really seem to be curious and receptive to it. And then you get to the academic world where we talked about a few minutes ago that are just, in their own little ivory tower world. And this, I think, is kind of the tragedy is that those guys, Simpsons and South Park, if only they were advising the political world to some extent. And I've tried with the ABT for 10 years, a dozen different political campaigns, and they're just resistant to anything. They all think they know how to do it themselves. So I've kind of given up in that direction. But fascinating. Matthew, somebody else was wanting to chime in on something.
Plenty of people. Karen, you're talking about the 1-2 punch. Want to tell us about that?
Well, rhetoric and action are two different things. And what I noticed, especially in the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk murder, is this incredible outpouring of, I'm still using left and right, although that doesn't do the trick. Like, it really doesn't. But people on the allies of Trump, etc., just pouring out these critiques of people on the left who are using hateful, inciting, inflammatory rhetoric, which clearly is like, looking in a mirror, because a lot of the hateful and inciting and inflammatory rhetoric is coming from the people pointing the finger at somebody else. But they're pointing the finger at them who caused this assassination and also are using this dangerous rhetoric at the same time that they're facilitating the action set that Andy was talking about. So it's like masterful deflection on the rhetorical side, and also sort of cover for the actions themselves, which are ultimately, what's the point of rhetoric? It's to cause action. Like, we are supposed to be using our voices and using our pens and electronic, whatever, to cause action to happen. So if they're pointing the finger at some other set of actors for making the actions happen that give them cover to do the actions that they want to do, I mean, it's like this incredible, masterful move on both sides. And it makes it really challenging because you can't say, no, we're not doing that. That's not us. We're not saying those things or encouraging these kinds of actions to happen. That's not an effective response. Holding up a mirror doesn't work. I mean, so we're trying to sort of show that it isn't the case on the rhetorical side, and also we don't have a powerful action set to contend with, to oppose their powerful action set.
Let me toss in one thing, jumping back a couple minutes. Mike had mentioned the term narrative fidelity, and then Charles had asked for clarity on that. And the simple little definition of that, to some extent, that we use in our training stuff is the term that we coined years ago. We called the Liz moment, but this really kind of brings it to life what it's about. Liz Foote was a member of our group. She's in Australia now. And in 2014, before I wrote the Houston book, she wrote me a really nice email and said, I heard about your ABT thing. I used it in a talk, and three things happened. Number one, I found the talk easier to rehearse than ever before. Number two, as I gave the talk, I looked out in the audience and people were more awake and not looking at their cell phones than ever before. And then number three, the important one, was in the days afterwards on social media, I saw people regurgitating the content of my talk and getting exactly right. And that's what you're talking about with narrative fidelity, Mike, isn't it? The idea that, yeah, you've locked in your message. You've worked so long and so hard. You've cracked the nut and found this optimal form for your information. And once you do, everybody's brain receptors are there to pick it up in that form and retain it with fidelity and regurgitate it down the line. And Doug, are you going to say something eventually? We're hitting on so many topics that are so relevant to your world, including The Simpsons.
The Simpsons.
Exactly. So Doug, once upon a time, he's world expert on the creation of sentencing mitigation videos, and the writers in The Simpsons decided to do an episode on that topic, and they ended up contacting him and bringing him in as the consultant on it. So yeah, take it from there, your Simpson thoughts.
Well, I wasn't actually brought in at the beginning. I learned of this when I was watching the show on a Sunday night and fell off the chair as my all-time favorite show was making fun of my life's work in that magical way that they do. So, that was just a highlight of my life. It's the best story ever. But I ended up getting to meet the writer of the episode and go to a table read with the cast and get a tour of the writer's room. And I still keep in touch with those folks to this day. So that is, I mean, they just did a thing on CBS Sunday Morning, the 37th year of The Simpsons. This last Sunday, if you Google it, it's an amazing piece. But I was like 17 years old when that show came out. I'm 55 now. I mean, that show has shaped my life.
Well, and it's
And
fascinating what Peter's talking about, that they're still on the cutting edge. I mean, they're not sitting around fat and sassy. They're still trying to figure out how the communications environment, the narrative environment of the country, of society, continues to change. This is what I've talked about of narrative selection. These things all evolve with time. The environment's constantly changing. And if you've studied evolutionary biology, you know that selection selects for different forms with time. And if people fail to innovate and keep up with the changes, they don't have anything for selection to work on. And that circles back to the science world that is still communicating the same way that they did decades ago. And there just isn't the variation. So yeah, you want to keep going on that, Doug?
when I watched that first episode, I still remember it like it was yesterday. I said, there's nothing, this is new. It was a new, I don't know what made it new and what made it different and what made it special, but it was a new narrative way. It was just a new way of storytelling. And it's so powerful. It survived it's the longest running show of all time. It surpassed MASH as the longest running comedy sitcom of all time, and it surpassed Gunsmoke as the longest running scripted show of all time. So there's some secret sauce there, and I'm not sure exactly what it is, but might be worth keeping that conversation going.
And hey, before we keep that going, can you give us a quick little 1 minute update on Doug had contacted me about a week and a half ago about a very urgent issue happening in Texas. The fellow who was about to be executed for shaken baby syndrome. And I think you got deeply involved in that issue. And it sounds like you've, at least temporarily, the guy's been taken off of death row or the execution.
Yeah, so he is 100% innocent, and he was wrongfully convicted on junk science, which I know this community it's near and dear to their heart, shaken baby syndrome, and autism, because his autistic traits were misinterpreted as signs of guilty conscience, because he didn't react the same way that a distraught father should be reacting when he brought his dying baby into the hospital. But tomorrow was his execution date. And I've been involved so much on the periphery. Like I tell people I had nothing to do with it, but I'm happy to take all the credit because But thank God right now they received a stay. and the court has remanded it down to the trial court for a hearing on the shaken baby issue. And if they can convince the court that this was, of the junk science element of this case, he's going to get a new trial, and his life will be saved. If he loses that hearing, we don't know when that hearing is going to be. If he loses it, the fight continues, but it's anyone's guess.
Are they going to bring in RFK Jr. to help with the junk science issue?
Maybe he can
Sorry.
help with the autism issue, because
Yeah,
it seems to be an issue near and dear to their heart.
boy.
I'm sorry for anyone who is circumcised that you probably have autism now.
Goes on and on. We got
But
about
if you're interested in this call and writing to the governor of Texas, whatever, go to the Innocence Project website. I'll send you a link, but you can make your voices heard. I would love it.
All right, we got the 6-minute warning here. Matthew, a couple other folks to chime in.
Yeah, Andy Revkin, you had something to say about Robert Reich?
Yeah.
I think he's come on so strong. He was early 90s. He was one of Clinton's team economics, and he's just very effective on social media. He's got 4 million followers on Facebook. He posts very clearly, and he made this key point about No King's Day, which is keep your message singular.
Mm.
And there are more than he are saying it. I went to the No Kings rally here in June, and half the speech was about Gaza. Like, what the fuck? There were people in the audience, excuse my language. There were Mainers in the audience who were saying, "No kings. This is all about no kings." Yeah, they were literally starting to do a counter chant because there were all these various progressive causes where it took over the mic. It's almost impossible for Democrats to do this thing of singular message.
That not the truth? God, I've witnessed it so much over the ages. One of my good buddies 30 some years ago ran the Hollywood Hunger Banquets for Oxfam, and they did it 5 years in a row. Incredible effort. And the fifth year melted down where they had Native American speaker came on, was supposed to speak for 5 minutes and went on for a half an hour, and nobody could get him off the stage. And all the celebrities fled, and everybody said, "We're never doing that again." Yeah, same basic syndrome. Matthew, one or two final comments.
So Peter, you're more up to speed on like the latest Simpsons episodes, right? I've kind of fallen out for the past, I don't know, however many decades. My question though is, so okay, at the very like micro level, it's very much punchline, 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 trying to like oversaturate. At the macro level, are the episode arcs still basically ABT structured?
I wouldn't say the episode arcs or the stories within the episodes or the character arcs are. Matt Groening is talking about the joke creation separately. There's this completely other thing that James L. Brooks does, which is the heart, the emotion. Groening, the writing room, they're in charge of the funny, the edge.
Yeah.
And Brooks oversees to keep it human, humane, heartfelt, thoughtful.
Interesting, because what Matthew's alluding to is what we're seeing more and more is this basic structure of fine scale ABT, but overarching and we're seeing it a lot. And with the narrative metrics, it starts to reveal that, and you get people that have got really high, butt to N ratio, and yet they're going nowhere. Namely, Trump's speeches, especially when he goes off script. And yeah, Peter.
Yeah, so the and is a child. Let me tell you a bad story in the worst possible way where I hide where it's going the whole time. And as soon as I get to the great bit of gossip, I gloss over it. That's what a child does. And ABT and the 3-act structure, the syllogism of Socrates and Aristotle, these are what adults do.
Yeah, interesting. And yet we're increasingly feeling like some of the major people on Substack, namely at least one Pulitzer Prize winner and another major medical expert, they have very high butt-to-N ratio, and yet they just seem every day to just be spewing about the next thing. There's no repeating message. There's no theme. There's just this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, on and on and on. And we are just about out of time. Mike back. Oh, Peter, and then Mike to wrap things up, unless there's anybody urgent, Matthew. But yeah, Peter.
I just wanted to say peace out. But the thing about the Democrats is they choose not to. It's not like they can't deploy these ultimate skills. They are defending truth, democracy, the American way, justice. And when you do that, you can't be a surrogate who disregards reality. If the Democrats wanted to succeed in the same way that the Republicans did, like Roger Stone, then we would have been focusing for the last 5 years on how Ivana Trump fell down a set of stairs alone and died and was buried in a non-public graveyard with no autopsy. Just like Vince Foster was made famous.
Right.
We don't have people who do that for a living.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's why they win.
Yeah, well, and Andy, final thought on discussion you and I've had for 5 or 6 years, but it's the idea of these people who believe in, quote, complicating the narrative. And I think they feel there's some sort of virtuousness in wanting to stick to communicating every little thing that happened because it is reality is and this is what everybody faces, over and over again. This is what the scientific journals force you to go through. You have to collect your and pile of information and then conform to their ABT structured writer's guidelines. And some people think there's a virtuousness in sticking to your guns and just boring everybody with and. But what good does that do? Final thought on that, Andy, and then Mike, you want to give us a final thought to finish with because we got to go.
Well, just that I've been guilty of that. I mean, my whole .earth blog at the New York Times for 9 years was complicating the narrative and saying, yeah, but what about this? So, because I felt like it was more important than being popular. But at the same time, if you want to change the world, you're right. Just what Peter was saying. That's why I think the Epstein files, I just put it in the comment. I think it's the one thing, the one narrative that everyone seems to be glomming on to still, that could be the one that somehow topples things because it's got that consistency actually from both ends of the spectrum.
Well, and you know what I would add on that is in a world of too much information, the most extreme offense is pedophilia. Everybody seems to have come to this decision, and therefore, if that's the crime that you're locking onto, that cuts through the noise better than kind of anything else. It seems to be. I think that's part of why it's so recurring. Mike, final thought, and then we gotta exit here. But got anything final to say on the future of noise?
Well, I mean, it's more about the survival of signal and the idea that signal only survives in the practice of attention. We live in a world right now where everybody is trying to speak louder to be heard, but the real skill to develop is how to hear through the noise.
And that's perfect finishing words. The real skill to develop is how to hear through the noise. Another excellent hour of discussion. Thank you all very, very much. We'll probably be back again next week because we got so many things going on. So cool. Thanks, everybody, and have a nice noise-filled week.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.